Well, today's topic is God hides treasures in unlikely places. So there's plenty of treasures that are in predictable places that you know that X marks the spot. So if you find a pirate map and you see the X, you know that around the X there's going to be booby traps if you've gone to any movies lately. But right where the X is, if it's not a fake map to get you to waste your time and go off track, if it's the real treasure map, where the X is, you're going to find a treasure chest, and in that, some marvelous treasures, probably stolen from someone else. That's how a pirate's map works. God hides treasure also, and God hides treasure in unlikely places. So, in a manger, in a cross, in your life, not just throughout your whole life, but also in the places where you think, I'm so ashamed of that. I wish that had never happened. That was so difficult. God hides treasures in those places too. We're going to take a moment, or a few minutes today to look at this whole concept. We're going to start with kind of an unlikely verse perhaps. In Joshua 24, Joshua is talking to the people of Israel and giving them a choice that they have had a chance to make over the years, but every now and then is a strategic moment that people need to decide where their allegiance lies, what they will believe in, what they will do, how they will act. So these choices come to us all the time. Will you pay your bills today? If not now, when? Maybe you will let some of your bills slide. Maybe you'll pay all of them the moment they arrive. Maybe you'll try to age them. Maybe you'll try to avoid them. Every part of your life, you have some decisions about it that are sometimes made on a daily basis, and it doesn't matter so much if you act today or tomorrow, if that's your choice. But some choices, they come up in a way, sometimes without fanfare, sometimes with no warning that this is your last chance, this is your final answer, but it is. On the game shows, they let you know. Is that your final answer? But in life, sometimes you don't know. I heard some people talking this week about Nona Armstrong talking at Thanksgiving, and for many of us, we also remember Helen Samples, one of the first Thanksgiving Sundays that we had, where we gave people a chance to stand at the microphone and thank God for anything they wanted. Helen stood up before her friends and family and thanked everyone for how great it was to be friends with so many great people. And she thanked her family in their presence. And she died so soon after that everybody remarked on it. How good it was that she had a chance to publicly say what she really felt and had been thinking for decades, but had not said in a public way. And she had a chance and she seized the opportunity. So there are times when I'm pretty sure, I don't know this for a fact, I'm pretty sure that Helen didn't think, this might be my last chance. Maybe she did, I don't know. But she just felt like, I want to express my thanks today. There are times when it's an opportunity that's never going to return. Much of your life, you can make a decision now and remake the decision later. Joshua is talking to people when they had a chance to make the decision or not. Choose this day whom you will serve. And he gives them a number of options of gods that they have followed in their past or their parents had followed. He says, but as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. So as they were at a strategic time in Israel's history, he was challenging everyone in the nation to make a decision that day This day choose whom you will serve. Is it going to be God or not? I'm going to serve God, Joshua says. What about you? So there are times when it's your time to make that commitment. And I can't predict for people what that day will be. But if this is your day, that this is a day that you should want to publicly acknowledge that Jesus is Lord, it'd be worth, during a hymn or something, to come up and talk to me and tell me that you want to do that. Or during communion, whisper it in my ear, or at some point. And what will happen for 99% of you is you're already sweating just thinking about the possibility. It's so far outside your comfort zone that nobody's ever done that, at least in the last year that I've seen. Well, people have done it in the last year, but it's been arranged. So they've been baptized here as an adult. They've made a choice to be on council and have publicly declared their faith. There have been a number of opportunities that have been arranged in advance. But it would be true that spontaneously just announcing, I want to follow Jesus, doesn't happen often enough around here. We don't make enough space for it in our service. And because of that, it requires some ambition on your part to say, this is the day I want to talk about my faith to others. The reason that's so helpful is because, well, let me answer that question in a little bit when we look at a couple other texts, okay? We'll start with Joshua. Here's from 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 22 and following. Paul says, Jews demand signs. So I don't know if it's true 2,000 years after Paul wrote this letter. But when Paul was writing this letter, in the milieu that he was part of, the people, his home team, he was Jewish, and the people that he was associating with a lot, his culture wanted to see a sign as proof. You say you're a great magician, fine, do some magic. You say you're a good architect, fine, show us a building you've done. If you say you're the Messiah, you ought to be able to prove it. So his culture, Paul's culture, demanded to see a sign. But the secular culture they were part of, the Greek culture, they valued wisdom. So the Greeks of the day didn't so much want to see a sign as proof. They wanted it to make sense. They wanted it to be logical, to be able to figure it out. Well, yeah, I can understand that. I can see how that's reasonable. Paul says, some people want proof. Some people want it to be reasonable logically, but God kind of frustrates both of those camps. We proclaim Christ crucified, and today this doesn't translate very well like it would have in Paul's day. Because for many people, they think Christ is a last name. They think Christ is the last name of Jesus. But Christ is a title that we just don't know very well in English. It means Messiah. So Paul says, we proclaim the Messiah of the world crucified. The person you are hoping to come rescue you and save you from everything you're afraid of, dead. Well, that's not a very good sign if you're asking for signs. It's not very wise if you're looking for something that's logical. The person that you were hoping for, no longer there. No longer just dead. We proclaim Christ crucified, Paul says, a stumbling block to Jews. If you're hoping for a nice sign about God's power, this is surely not it. And foolishness to the Gentiles. If you're looking for something that makes sense, this is not it. But to those who are called both Jews and Greeks, there are some Jews and some Gentiles who, in spite of what they really wanted, When they see Jesus, they know Jesus is the Messiah. They know Jesus is Lord. To those who are the called, both Greeks and Jews, Christ, the Messiah, is the power of God and the wisdom of God. Jesus Christ crucified is the power of God and the wisdom of God. For God's foolishness, Paul says, is wiser than human wisdom, and God's weakness is stronger than human strength. All right, we're going to look at one more text. This one is from the Gospel of John. We've been working our way through all the Gospels, taking a look at what happened to Jesus in the last week of his life. And we started this months ago, and we're about to where the next thing that's going to happen is Jesus breaking the bread and Good Friday. So Monday, Thursday, Good Friday. In John, this happens right before that. So it's kind of difficult to align all the Gospels. They aren't written in the same chronological order, and so it's a choice, basically. There are lots of places where various stories could happen depending on which order you're following. But in John, this happens at the spot we are today as we're looking at this month-long review of the last week of Jesus' life. John writes in chapter 12, although Jesus had performed so many signs in their presence, they did not believe in him. So the culture that wanted signs saw the signs, said they still weren't convinced. And that's the trouble really with signs. If you've got a hard heart, there's nothing that will change it except changing your heart. But seeing something different won't change a hard heart. If you have a particular way of viewing the world and you see something that doesn't fit your way of viewing the world, what will happen most of the time is that you will reject the evidence and reinterpret the evidence to fit your theory of how the world works. So even though Jesus is in a culture that's hoping for signs, he performs them, they still didn't believe in him. This, John writes, is to fulfill what Isaiah had said. Lord, who has believed our message, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? I want you to remember this because we're going to come back to it in just a minute and take a look at its context in Isaiah. John quotes two sections of Isaiah. This is the first one, and we're going to come back to this in its spot in Isaiah. The second one that he quotes is this. God blinded their eyes and hardened their hearts so that they might not look with their eyes and understand with their heart and turn, and I would heal them. So if we're able to look and to see and change, we are healed by God who loves us. But if you stay not looking, not understanding, you miss the healing. Isaiah said this, John writes, because he saw the glory, Jesus' glory, and spoke about him. Nevertheless, many, even of the authorities, believed in him, that is, in Jesus. So many of the authorities believed in Jesus, but because of the Pharisees, they did not confess it. So back to our question that we said we'd put on pause for a while. If you don't want to come up front here to acknowledge your faith, the odds are you won't want to acknowledge your faith at Vaughn's or Ralph's, CVS, the opera, basketball game, wherever you are, at work, at school. This is not the end. If you confess your faith here, that's not, oh, you passed and it's great. This is just practice here. This is practice here so that out there you can do the real work, the real stuff. This is before a friendly home crowd who will cheer you on that you confess your faith, so that when someone on the street says, "You're not one of those Bible-thumping believers, are you?" You can say, "Well, actually, I've never thumped it, but I do read it quite a bit." Or whatever it is for you. Maybe you are. Whatever your response is, you're able to give it and not just fade into the woodwork and let the trolls on Facebook or whatever media you're watching cause someone who knows the truth not to say it, and cause the light to dim in a place that desperately needs light. Jesus says you're the light of the world. It needs you. But it needs you to shine, to be the light. All right. Many, even of the authorities, believed in Jesus, but because of the Pharisees, they did not confess it for fear that they would be put out of the synagogue. In those days, if you confessed Jesus was Lord, you'd be kicked out. And in those days, it was quite a bit more special to be part of the temple than it is here. I mean, if you were kicked out here, you could just walk 3 blocks and go into another church. But in those days, that wasn't possible. You were getting kicked out of your heritage. You were getting kicked out of what people believed was the only true way. So they stayed in the synagogue, silent about what they believed about the Son of God, for fear that they would lose their place before people. And fearing to lose their place before people, they lost their place before God. So Paul says the Greeks like wisdom. So let's try and figure this part out logically. If you have a choice between having a great reputation among a bunch of people and having a lousy reputation with God, do you think that's a good trade-off? How many would rather have a lousy reputation with people and a great reputation with God? I'm going to just tell you that's the good answer in case you don't know. If you're going to make a choice, you want to err on the side of an omnipotent being who loves you and is around for eternity and plans to keep you around for eternity. They loved human glory more than the glory that comes from God. One of the reasons this is so common is because human glory is so awesome, and God's glory is frequently so hidden. So if you want to know what human glory looks like, have you been to Las Vegas recently enough so you remember how dazzling it is? Number of you. So if you don't know, you just have to ask somebody else. Off the charts, they invest a lot in electricity and architecture and other things to make it dazzling and glorious and beautiful. All of that is paid for by people who are there before you. And you can contribute. You can help them pay the light bill. Human glory is often inspiring, amazing, off the charts, wonderful. And God's glory is often so hidden, it seems like, is there really something there? It's just a baby in a manger. It's just a dead guy on a cross. The glory that comes from God, when it shows up in your life, might be smack dab in the center of a divorce or bankruptcy or moral failure, something that was actually your fault. Why would God hide any glory there? X marks the spot. That's not a spot that you want to return to very often. But God is able to invest in you so completely that in every broken spot of your life, there is God's glory in it. And it may not be something that you want to share with others, but it's there. The challenge for us who know Jesus is that what we have to offer to people is sometimes not what they think they're looking for. And sometimes people try so desperately to medicate their lives that they no longer have an appetite for what really is truly helpful. But you're able to speak truth and love and God's peace and joy into their lives in a way that nobody else can. So I ask you to remember the one quote that John had from Isaiah, because we're going to look as we close at where it is in Isaiah. It's Isaiah 53. Who has believed what we have heard, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? So this is the part that John quoted, and we're going to look at just a little bit more of this to see the context of this. He grew up before him like a young plant, like a root out of dry ground. I meant to dig up our garden this morning, and I forgot. We've got a root in there, just to show you what a root looks like in dry ground. Now, our ground over there is not as dry as it could be, but every other day, because of the city, it's dry. So have you seen a rutabaga? Or a potato? Or if you saw a person who looked like a rutabaga, would you think, that's someone I want to date? Would you think, that's someone I really would like that person to be my president? That's someone I really would like to follow. I'd like to model my life after Mrs. Rutabaga. No, probably, possibly, you might think, Mrs. Rutabaga, would you have a seat here? And I'll be right back, but I'm going to be at this other table over here for a while. Isaiah prophesying about Jesus said when he grew up, there was nothing attractive about him. No reason to pay attention to him. Some people think, oh, that gap between age 12 and 30, it's too bad we don't know anything about that. It's because people didn't want to see him. There's nothing to him. God's glory was so hidden, it seemed like Jesus was a rutabaga, a root out of dry ground. He had no form or majesty that we should look at him. Some people think, well, if Jesus just appeared, I would honor him. Well, maybe if you're in the habit of honoring the least and the lost and hanging out with people that are in part of God's kingdom, yes. But if you're in the habit of only hanging out with Hollywood types, you might miss him. He had no form or majesty that we should look at him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. He was despised. He was rejected by others. It would have been easy to figure out who Jesus was in the high school cafeteria. The cheerleader table, not there. Jock table, not there. Band table, not there. Nerd table, no, he didn't make the cut there either. They're too popular these days. He's off on the table that the nerds won't talk to. He was despised and rejected. A man of suffering and acquainted with infirmity, and as one from whom others hide their faces. Who do you hide your face from? I mean, a bill collector, IRS. Not many people, right? People hid their faces from Jesus. We held him of no account. Surely he has borne our infirmities and carried our diseases. When you're well, it's because of Jesus. Yet we accounted him stricken, struck down by God, and afflicted. We looked at this rutabaga and said, if it's not his fault, God judged him. But he was wounded for our transgressions and crushed because of me, because of you. He was crushed on our account for our iniquities. So I understand that the deal about not wanting to come in public and acknowledge your faith before a group of people for whom you have, they're important to you. You've seen them, known them for so many years. But we do things like that so that we have the courage when we really are called on to stand up for Jesus in a setting that really does make a difference. Not here, this is the home crowd. When we have a chance to do it in a place where it will change a life or many lives, we're able to do it there also. And acknowledge whatever your story might be something like this, it might be different. But your story might be, at one time I didn't value Jesus at all. I heard about him, I just didn't think much about him. He was like a dry root to me. But once I finally figured out that it was what I did that Jesus died for, and his love for me that caused him to die, it changed something for me. And I know that it could change something for you too. How you tell the story will exactly fit you, hopefully, and not be a script produced by Billy Graham or Campus Crusade or anybody else who writes great scripts. It'll be your story. He was wounded for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the punishment that made us whole, and by his bruises we are healed. Every physical healing, every emotional healing, mental healing, every spiritual healing. Salvation from death, the power of the devil, all done on that cross out of love for you. God hides treasure in unlikely places. It's not easy to look at the cross. It's not easy to look at a manger as a place for a baby. It is if you're looking at it in a store display, but it's not easy to look at when you've got a cow pooping right next to the baby. In a store display, they can play carols, they can have fake snow falling, they can adjust the ambiance so that it's delightful. And it's not delightful when the cow is kicking the stall and there's not enough room because there's so many animals. You can't get into the inn because it's full, so it's not that there's lots of room in the stable either. The stable's cramped with animals. They don't smell like the people next to you. God hides treasure in unlikely places, including you. And hopefully, you'll let some of that treasure shine. We're going to take a moment for prayer. God, we are many times remiss. Missing in action. Right there, just not doing anything. as if we were invisible or not present. Someone says something that is clearly not true and needs to know how much God loves them. And they never hear the words, you know, that's really not how God acts. God loves you. Help us to be light and salt in all we're called to be, in all the places where you need us. Thank you. Amen.